good morning, colleagues. And in true form, because of the true state of the nation address, we have load shedding, and therefore there is no air conditioning in this room, and so we do apologize for that. And good morning all, and welcome to this year's true state of the nation address. However, I would firstly like to greet the ambassadors, the high commissioners, members of the diplomatic corps, the DA shadow cabinet, provincial leaders, DA colleagues, and members of the media who are here with us today. Every year ahead of the State of the Nation Address, the DA hosts this event which we've dubbed the True State of the Nation Address, which is addressed by the DA leader. This has been an ongoing tradition for a number of reasons. We don't simply view ourselves as simply an opposition party, but a government in waiting. And by that I mean ours is not simply to oppose or criticize government. We have a constitutional obligation to not only represent the people who vote for us, but for millions of South Africans across the board. And we have a constitutional obligation to take it upon ourselves to really conjure up solutions that we believe will be the solutions to the issues facing South Africans. In representing South Africans, we ought to fully participate in the democratic process, offer solutions to the governing party, engage with experts of the various crises facing our country, but more importantly, set an alternative vision for South Africa. This isn't only for electioneering purposes, but as I said, it is to demonstrate the beauty of the plurality of voices in our hard-earned constitutional democracy, to be constructive in our work, and to endeavor to change the lives of millions of South Africans who have been left behind. The 30 million people who continue to languish in poverty, the millions who continue to form part of the unemployment queues, and those who are rapidly losing faith in the democratic process. So this event, colleagues, is important for that very reason. We do this event so that we can show South Africans that it is important to see what alternative there is out there. It is also especially important in the current climate where we are likely to see a rapid decline in the ANC's support. And so it means soon South Africans will have an opportunity of making a choice of who will govern the country. And so today you'll hear from the DA leader about the vision of the country and how we can make that a reality. However, before you do, I would like to highlight some of the key achievements we have attained on the opposition benches over the past year in Parliament. As the Chief Whip of not only the DA, but also the official opposition in Parliament, it is our role to make sure that we truly live up to the oath of office that we took to represent and uphold the Constitution. And so the key highlights were we're driving the issue of rebuilding Parliament after it was gutted down by the fire. We have elected to take Parliament to court for failing to meet its constitutional obligation of opening Parliament for true public participation. We have diligently participated in the impeachment process of the public protector. We have pursued getting the ANC's cadre deployment policy declared unlawful. We've been the only party driving the issue of the cost of living crisis, which has shackled many South Africans. And we have led the fight to make sure that the recommendations of the Zondo Commission, Judicial Commission report are implemented and that the rules of Parliament are amended so that we can make sure that we never see state capture again. And lastly, when the revelations of the Phala Phala scandal surfaced, we immediately called for an ad hoc committee to investigate whether or not the president had broken his oath in office. Even when this request was turned down, we still fully participated in the Section 89 process, which was eventually voted down by the ANC. But I can assure you, we are not going to let this matter go. And so that's just a snapshot of the work that we have done in Parliament over the last year. And of course, John will be highlighting some of our key priorities in the next coming year, not just in Parliament, but across the country. But before I hand over to John, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Ivan Meyer, our party chair, for him to have his opening remarks.
Thank you to our Chief Whip, to our colleagues and friends here this morning, Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, High Commissioners, Consul Generals, Honorary Consul Generals, Heads of Missions, on behalf of the Democratic Alliance, I want to welcome you to this true State of the Nation address. But we also have in our presence our Deputy Chief Whip, Dr. Annelie Lothriet, and I would like her to please stand because next time you're going to see us, we will be in the Union buildings. We also have with us the Chairperson of the Caucus of the National Assembly, Desiree van der Walt. Also like her to stand, please. And then my friend and colleague, Deputy Federal Chair, Refilwe Ntseke, Member of Parliament from Gauteng. She may also please stand. And then Mr. Thomas Walters, our Deputy Chairperson of the Federal Council. Thank you, Thomas. The others may be seated. Our Shadow DA Minister for International Relations, Mr. Darren Bergman, thank you for your presence. All members of the DA Shadow Cabinet who are here, I'm very pleased that you are also here because during the COVID-19 pandemic and now during the electricity pandemic, John Steenhuisen convened the Shadow Cabinet, and I'm particularly pleased as they are seated here because this is the engine room of making sure that we navigate through this difficult and complex period of load shedding, and I will say something more about that. But I'm also particularly happy and pleased that we have our three provincial leaders also present here. Firstly, Jane Sithole from Mpumalanga. The political grounds are shifting in Mpumalanga as a result of our leader in Mpumalanga. The next one is Dr. Roy Jenkinson from the Free State. Thank you, Roy. Roy had his first successful provincial congress about a week ago. Thank you, Roy, for the great work you are doing. We know the Free State is in good hands under the Democratic Alliance. Also in the Northwest, my friend, Mr. Leon Basson, the DA leader. We're happy to present our leaders to you because we are shifting the political boundaries in South Africa. And John will outline the reasons and the plan, and I'm also happy to have the Deputy Speaker of the Western Cape Provincial Parliament here today, Ms. Beverly Safer. Thank you for your presence. Gives me now great pleasure to introduce our speaker, born in Durban, matriculated Northwood Boys High. He joined the Democratic Party and was elected to the Durban City Council in 1999 as the councillor for Durban North. In 2000, the Democratic Alliance was formed and he was elected as a councillor of the newly formed eThekwini Metropolitan Municipality, and that year's municipal election, he was also appointed as the DA caucus leader in 2006. After the 2009 election, he became a member of the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Legislature and was also appointed as a DA caucus leader. Soon after that, he was elected as the party's KwaZulu-Natal Provincial leader, and he joined the National Assembly in July 2011. And then he became the Shadow Minister for Local Government in February 2012. In 2014, John Steenhuisen was appointed as the Chief Whip, and in that capacity, he excelled. He changed the nature of Parliament, the substance, the direction of Parliament. And also in 2019, he was elected as the in 2019, first he was an interim leader, and then late in 2020, he was elected by the DA Federal Congress as the leader for the Democratic Alliance. Ladies and gentlemen, I therefore present to you the leader of the official opposition in South Africa. But before I call him up, there's the politics of pragmatism that defines Don Steenhuisen. During COVID-19, he saw the government had no direction, no purpose, no plan. He immediately convened a shadow cabinet, and during that shadow cabinet, he implemented the principle of politics of pragmatism. He said, let's define the problem. Let's define the outcomes of this problem. Let's get a clear plan that's practical, that has target dates. And lastly, he said, let's develop a system of monitoring and evaluation. And that became the plan for the government eventually. And so I am pleased that now with the energy crisis that we are now experiencing, and that's why I'm so happy that both our shadow ministers, Kevin Milam and Katalia is here, because they are advising him and the shadow cabinet about how to navigate out of this energy crisis here in South Africa. And so I'm particularly pleased that he is driven by the politics of pragmatism. The DA must get things done. I present to you the man that will get things done in the energy crisis. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, members of the diplomatic corps, the leader of the Democratic Alliance in the National Council of Provinces, Kathy Labuskaghni, members of the media, fellow colleagues, fellow South Africans. For those of you who are here today from out of town, welcome to the mother city on a beautiful summer's day. I hope you're going to enjoy your stay here in the DA-run city of Cape Town, because there really is no better city to visit at the height of summer. A bit of aircon would have been nice, but this is the reality that we find ourselves in, the real state of the nation. But the truth is that since the people of the city elected a DA government in 2006, Cape Town has come to represent so much more than just a beautiful tourist destination. Cape Town, along with other places where the DA enjoys an outright majority, most of the Western Cape, Midvaal in Gauteng, Koga in the Eastern Cape, and more recently, Umgeni municipality in KwaZulu-Natal, provide a glimpse into what South Africa could have looked like after nearly 30 years into our democracy. In the midst of the accelerating collapse of national government in cities and towns and services around us, all best exemplified by the permanent load shedding that we now find ourselves in, most people are very, very concerned about the trajectory that the country is currently on. Polling from the Social Research Foundation that was released recently showed us that over 70% of South Africans feel that the country is moving in the wrong direction. The Ipsos poll has that figure slightly higher at 74%. Yet alarming as these figures are to us as South Africans, they also enable us the opportunity to pose a counterfactual question. How would South Africans have felt about the future if the whole country was heading in the same direction as Cape Town, Midvaal, Umgeni, Koga, and other places that have a solid DA majority? How would international investors have looked at South Africa if the national government did not tolerate corruption and embrace the private sector as a partner in the growth and jobs agenda, just like the Western Cape government does? What would South Africa's global reputation have been if we had sided with Ukraine and the free world against Russian aggression, like all DA governments have done? And while I do not suggest for a moment that DA governments are perfect, they certainly are not, I'm confident that most people would be far more hopeful about South Africa's future if the national government delivered honest, quality services at the same level that the Western Cape, Midvaal, Umgeni, and other DA municipalities do. And rather than being in danger of becoming once again the skunk of the world due to the ANC's support for the criminal invasion of Ukraine, I suspect that our country's global standings will be trending upwards if we had done the right thing by standing up strongly against Russian aggression. You are allowed to clap. To my mind, there can be little doubt that a South Africa on the same positive path as DA-run governments like Cape Town, we would have had a country on the up. A country making progress in overcoming serious challenges and growing ever more confident in our ability to become the world-class winning nation that we dreamed of in 1994. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that the reality of South Africa that we inhabit today is very far removed from that vision. As we gear up now for President Cyril Ramaphosa's 5th State of the Nation address since the ousting of Jacob Zuma, we need to take a full step back and view that period now in its entirety. Because it's very easy to get carried away by the shiny new baubles. No doubt the brand new 10-point plan, the newly announced task team, a new commission here or there, the new czars that will be appointed, and of course the dreams. We get those every single year. Who can forget the bullet train, which we're still waiting to see? But the reality is that Cyril Ramaphosa was sworn into office as president 5 years ago. And he rode into town on a promise of cleaning up and cleaning out. He was carried into the union buildings with huge waves of goodwill from ordinary South Africans and euphoria following the disaster that was the ANC government of Jacob Zuma. And we all know that there's now very little left of that goodwill and less confidence that things will improve. So if Thursday is truly about setting out the state of the nation, we're going to have to look past the carefully crafted smoke and mirrors, the cherry-picked statistics, and take in the bigger picture of the full 5 years of this administration. Because that's the best way to see whether we're making progress or not. It's also important to see where we might be heading as a country. Look at the country's trajectory on crime. Look at the country's trajectory on infrastructure maintenance and investment. Look at the trajectory on capital skills and flight. Look at the trajectory on load shedding. Look at the trajectory on poverty. And see where we now stand on every one of these things and in which way the trend is now heading. And the reality for the majority of South African citizens, as opposed to the pampered and insulated ANC elite who have managed to insulate themselves from the terrible effects of the very policies that they have perpetrated on the country, the reality is that life has got a great deal harder for more and more South Africans over that past 5 years. Increases in the cost of living have far outstripped earnings for almost every single South African, and most certainly for those trying to survive on social grants, which is now almost 50% of South Africa's full population. That's the 18.4 million South Africans who receive a social grant, plus the 10.5 million recipients of the Social Relief of Distress COVID grant. For these people, the sharp rise in the cost of the basic foodstuffs and basic baskets of goods, along with multiple shocks of hyperinflationary increases on electricity tariffs and petrol, has made life unbearably hard. And it has pushed more and more of our citizens below the poverty line and into greater despair. And that situation is only going to get worse this year. That's the reality. As indefinite load shedding grips our economy, wreaks havoc, shuts down our businesses, closes our factories, deters international investors, and sends even more people from the workplace into the social welfare queue. Now, you don't have to be an economist to know that this is an unsustainable situation and that we are fast approaching the breaking point in South Africa. Already government's social grant spending this financial year will reach a massive 364 billion rand. That's expected to take up almost 60% of our entire non-interest spending over the next 3 years. Now factor in the shrinking tax base, factor in the steady exodus of skills and capital out of the country, and you will see that we are heading for an unprecedented crisis if we don't find a way to drastically change this course to ensure that we can keep paying for the social spend. Because if we don't, last July's riots in KwaZulu-Natal will seem like a tame dress rehearsal, the day that government can no longer pay the social grant. And we cannot risk this situation. If we want to right this ship, it's going to have to be done on multiple fronts simultaneously. We have to get our economy expanding beyond the dismal 0.3% forecast this last week by the South African Reserve Bank. We have to find a way to stop skills and businesses from leaving our shores, and we have to find ways to bring in new investments. And we have to be able to help more and more South Africans move into the only giver of real dignity in this country, a job. And the reality is, we have no time left to waste. But the sadness is that when you look at every single performance on every single critical metric over the past 5 years, it shows that we are doing none of these things. And that in fact, South Africa is year after year regressing. And arguably the most telling of these metrics is the hours of the days that we spent under load shedding, which is a fancy way of saying blackouts. Because this is by far the single biggest impediment to investment and growth. So let's look at those figures over the course of the term of Mr. Ramaphosa. In 2018, South Africa spent a total of 6 days under load shedding. Since then, it has gone up every single year. First to 22 days, then 35 days. And in 2021, we spent 48 days under load shedding. But it was last year, 2022, when the wheels really came off, and our country spent an incredible 157 days of 365 under load shedding. And sadly, it looks like 2023 is ready to break all those records. Just this past Sunday, Eskom set a dubious new record of the longest ever streak of uninterrupted load shedding, a staggering 984 hours consecutively and counting. This is not a country on the mend. This is a country that's busy falling apart. And despite all the bluster and PR spin, this is Ramaphosa's real legacy. He has only added another 5 years to the 9 wasted years that he blames on his predecessor. This is a country that is losing hundreds of billions of rand every single year in productivity and hundreds of thousands of jobs to an ANC-made crisis. A crisis to which, from the DA to experts to media commentators, have been proposing simple solutions. But thanks to that ideological stubbornness and its deeply entrenched web of patronage and corruption, these solutions have just always been a bridge too far away for the ANC. And of course, load shedding is the most visible and most threatening of the state failures to affect South Africans. But as we all know, it's by no means the only one. Our post office has collapsed. Used to send letters and they would take months to arrive. Now they don't even arrive at all. Our freight rail network has collapsed. Our passenger rail service has collapsed. Our ports have all but collapsed. Our police service is losing the war against violent crime. And municipal service delivery in hundreds of towns and cities around the country is simply non-existent. These failures have been a long time in coming. But with the move to permanent high-stage load shedding, government failure has now reached into every single home in South Africa in a way that can no longer be countenanced. So for many people who have packed up and left the country, Eskom's collapse was for them the final straw. For the millions who remain here, load shedding remains a daily source of despair, of anguish, and truly a metaphor for what life has become under the ANC government. In every community I visit, this has been the constant refrain and the only theme in our conversations. People feel furious, but equally powerless. The most common comment I get from South Africans in all communities is, "John, we don't know what to do anymore." And my answer to them is always the same. As long as we still have a working democracy, failure does not have to define our future as a country. And thanks to our democracy, we still have a way out of this mess. Right now, the people of South Africa are facing the biggest fork in the road in a generation. Our choice of road will determine whether we end up as a failed state with misery, poverty and hunger and social anarchy, or whether we decide to embark on a long, arduous journey to recovery and ultimately prosperity. Because as much as some may try to complicate our options, it really is a simple binary between the ANC and the DA. This is why the question of how different things could have been if the national government operated along the same values and principles and lines and experience of DA-led local and provincial governments. And that's why it's so much more than just an interesting thought experiment. It is, in fact, the most single important question we must consider if we want tomorrow to be better than today. And that's because, as the 2024 election fast approaches, the DA offers the only credible alternative road and way forward for our country and for our citizens. And let's be clear about it. What the DA offers is better. It is better. And you need not look much further than right here in Cape Town, where residents are already protected from 2 stages of load shedding. It's thanks to DA policies that Cape Town is set to be the first city in the country to start buying electricity from businesses and households. And while hundreds of megawatts of privately produced power projects are on the way to end load shedding here before anywhere else in South Africa. Where the DA governs outright, potholes are repaired, sewage is collected, and infrastructure is maintained. And as the failures of national government continue to accelerate, DA local governments are increasingly stepping in and taking over these services to shield these residents from national government failure. Things like electricity generation, things like public transport, and important things like policing. As the collapse of ANC-run governments accelerates at the same time that the DA pushes the boundaries of innovation and good governance, the gap between these two paradigms is set to become a yawning chasm by the time the 2024 election rolls around. There is simply no realistic path to fixing South Africa that will not rely heavily on the DA bringing our demonstrated track record of good governance to bear at a national level. We've proven that we're a party of local government. We've proven we're a party of provincial government. It's now time to show South Africa that we're a party of national government. And in fact, there are only 2 realistic scenarios for what South Africa's future could look like, as much as people may try to complicate and obfuscate and pour smoke into the experience. Before we look at those, I want to emphasize the word realistic in the previous sentence. There are only 2 realistic scenarios for what South Africa could look like. The 2024's silly season of elections is upon us, and during which you're going to hear all kinds of self-serving yet entirely unrealistic promises. Tiny opposition parties will promise things that they know themselves they can never, ever deliver. No hope politicians will try and convince you that a ragtag 10-party minority coalition will somehow magically bring the country the policy stability that we know it so desperately needs. Wannabe strongmen will argue that scapegoating our Constitution is the populist silver bullet that we need to deal decisively with the multifaceted problems that we face. All of this is smoke and mirrors, designed to distract you from the real binary choice that lies before you. And the truth is that there are only two realistic possibilities for South Africa on the table. And the only two realistic possibilities for what South Africa will look like after the 2024 election. The one is a horrifying prospect of a government that continues to operate on the basis of the ANC's failed paradigm of state control, cadre deployment, patronage and corruption. The other hopeful possibility is a government that charts a new course for South Africa, guided by the DA's values and commitments, our principles and our steadfast holding to these principles of accountability, non-racialism, and a commitment to the rule of law and a social market economy. I want you to just think about it with me for a moment. Just think about it without the noise, and you will truly see that these are the only two real prospects for the future. On the one hand, the election result sees the ANC scraping together a 50% majority, and that obviously means more of the same downward trajectory we've been on for the last 5, the last 9, the last 15 years. Corruption will continue unabated as the ANC continues to practice their disastrous policies like cadre deployment. The government will continue to regard private enterprise with hostility, to hold monopoly over critical levers of our economy, and to provide substandard education services and substandard and inhumane healthcare services. And as a consequence of that, load shedding will continue, poverty and inequality will continue to grow and rise, and accelerated capital flight will turn South Africa into an isolated basket case. Equally, an outcome that sees the ANC teaming up with small parties with or without the involvement of the EFF will yield a government guided by an even more intense concoction of the same failed ANC patronage politics that have got us into this current mess. For proof that a coalition dominated by the ANC offers no prospect of change, look no further than what is currently playing out in the city of Johannesburg. There, the ANC have handed the mayoralty to a proxy Handlanger party that got less than 1% of the vote, in order to continue them leading that city down the path of an ANC-engineered decay. While Johannesburg is nominally led by a mayor from another party, the reality is it is once again under the control of the same old ANC-style policies. In effect, it is an ANC government in a slightly different guise. In a scenario where the ANC scrapes together an outright majority in 2024, or where it teams up with other proxies like the EFF and small parties, we will simply walk faster down that same road to ruin that we are already on, because there would have been absolutely no course correction. In this scenario, what we will get after 2024 will fundamentally still be a government dressed in yellow, just perhaps wearing a red beret and an orange pair of socks. That's what you're going to get. On the other hand, we have the other realistic and far more hopeful option. This is an option of a government guided by the same DA values and principles that have put a place like Cape Town on a fundamentally better trajectory than all ANC-run governments. While the exact configuration of this new DA government built on DA values and principles is hard to foretell, any such majority coalition will, by definition, feature the DA as the anchor tenant. This will be a government dressed in blue. And I'm sure the next 14 months will feature intense speculation about what our next national government will look like. But there is one thing that we can all be certain of already. That new government will either be led by the ANC or to be led by the DA. Even those who hold out hope for some new party that's going to magically be formed, or for some purified, refined version of the ANC to form some breakaway before 2024, cannot escape the reality that such splinters would not get close to the 50% that they would require to choose between working with the party that it came from or throwing its weight behind the DA. That blue or yellow are the only two credible choices is confirmed by an important story that was published just this past weekend in the City Press newspaper. According to the ANC's own internal research polling, not the DA propaganda factory, not the DA letter factory, the ANC is now polling below 40%, even as low as 37%, as fed-up voters continuously look for an alternative that can solve load shedding, stop corruption, reduce crime, and bring down the rampant unemployment and the unaffordable cost of living that is tearing into homes across South Africa. And which party do these people see as the alternative? A credible alternative? It is the DA. And the polls put us at 27%. That's up 7% since 2019 and still growing steadily towards that 30% number. That the difference between the ANC and the DA is now as low as 10 percentage points demonstrates conclusively that 2024 is going to be a two-horse race. And anyone who tries to convince you that a party outside of the ANC or DA could lead the next government is either dishonest or they are delusional. Just think about the mathematics. At 27%, the DA is bigger than the EFF, IFP, and the next four parties combined. Instead of fragmenting the opposition vote among tiny parties with no realistic shot at leading a government, doesn't it make so much more sense for South Africans who truly want the change, who want to embrace the hope, to consolidate support behind the DA so we can close that 10% gap and overtake the ANC? That's what we need. And here is a fact that few people may know. If the 14% of voters who are currently fragmented among dozens of tiny parties that will all get less than 1% of the vote switch to the DA before 2024, our support will overtake the ANC, it will grow over 40%, and we will overtake them in that election. That's where we've got to be. And all of this makes it clear. In the completely rational, cold light of day, pragmatic, mathematical reality is that any road to forming a new government, which commands over 50% of the parties in Parliament after 2024, will either run through ANC Town or run through DA-ville. That is the reality. So what are the implications of this for all of us? It's simply this. Anyone who wants to see this country turn away from the failed policies, the failed politicians that has put us on this road to collapse, and get South Africa onto a new path of hope, prosperity, and change and recovery, needs to get behind the DA. And there are promising signs that a majority of voters are ready to dump the failed yellow way in favor of a blue new way. Analysts conducted by the Social Research Foundation last year showed that the underlying societal shift required to bring about such profound change is already taking place. For the first time ever, it was the DA that came out as the number one choice for all voters when it came to effective service delivery, clean governance, good policies, and ensuring accountability. At the same time, the ANC was most associated with breaking promises, only caring about itself, and being anti-poor. So clearly the DA's work over these past 3 years to take on the issues that matter to voters is starting to pay off. Through our campaigns to reduce the cost of living and end cadre deployment, devolving policing powers away from the national to competent local and provincial governments, to improve basic service delivery, to beat back load shedding where we govern, we are winning over more and more people from all backgrounds. This too is reflected in the SRF research, which shows that by far the DA has the most diverse support base of any party, drawing support in equal amounts from all major demographic groups. Support from all major demographic groups. And it shows that the DA has now overtaken the ANC as the largest party in urban South Africa. So taken together, the DA has put in place the necessary ingredients to ensure that the whole of South Africa embarks on a fundamentally new path and a fundamentally better path that has led to places like Cape Town and the Western Cape succeeding. Now what remains for us is to take this message of hope across the length and breadth of the country in the lead up to the 2024 election. The DA is going to knock on doors all over the country, bringing this good news and this message of hope and change, and demonstrating to people that where you change your vote, you can change your life. And the plans to do that are already at an advanced stage. But it is not only voters who need to confront the clear binary choice that we now face as a country, and that fork in the road with those two very clear paths and those two very clear destinations. Business people, international investors, diplomats, media commentators, and members of civil society organizations will also have to make a choice about the future that they want to see. So if you're in a position of power, wherever you may be, you have a responsibility to help this country make the right choice out of those two options that lie before you. Change is in the air, and our future is on the line. Influential members of our society must not be bullied or intimidated by the withering ANC to try and browbeat them into silence. So I call upon everybody in this room, and I call upon everybody across South Africa to use your democratic right to freedom of speech, to take a stand in favor of the DA leading a national government in 2024. And I'm convinced that the majority of you will ultimately agree with the shifting voter sentiment that offers the DA as the only credible way out of the deep hole that South Africa finds itself in. If you count yourself among the groups who want this country to succeed, who wanted to embark on a fundamentally better path, then use your voice, raise your voice in the service of change. Because that is ultimately what democracy demands of each of us. It offers us the possibility of peacefully changing direction. It gives us a way out when we recognize that the road that we're currently on leads to a dangerous dead end. Democracy gives us that opportunity to assess that binary choice between more of the same under the ANC or a better way forward under the DA. But it will not make the choice for us. Democracy will not make the choice for us. That is up to each and every one of us. By using our influence to persuade those around us to make the right choice. By speaking up about the nature of the binary choice facing South Africa. And ultimately, by using our ballot paper at the ballot box to effect the change that we want to see. Esteemed guests, fellow Democrats, South Africans, the true state of our nation is that people have a binary choice to make. That in this next election is going to irrevocably shape South Africa for generations to come. Nothing that President Ramaphosa says on Thursday is going to change this reality. In fact, it is Ramaphosa that has taken us down this path of failure over these last 5 wasted years, during which time the country has gone rapidly backwards on almost every conceivable metric. The truth is that he has had his chance and he spectacularly blew it. The future of this country, good news, is that the future of this country is no longer up to him or to his party. History has overtaken Cyril Ramaphosa. The future now rests with the people of South Africa. And it's up to each and every one of us to find our voice, strengthen the only party with a credible, better alternative for South Africa. That party is the DA. And in 2024, we must form a new government built around the same values and principles that have put places like Cape Town onto a better path. It is for precisely a moment like this, where we are confronted by a binary choice between oblivion and reconstruction, that we have a democracy. Now is the time to use that democracy to save our beloved country while we still can. Thank you very much.